Good morning, Whitford Parish. Good to see you all. Saw lots of people just now on the morning worship with Andy, which was good. And so while I wait for people to arrive, I'm just going to read the Bible passage again. It was a long one, a lot to concentrate on. Judges 16, if you want to follow it. Judges 16 in Samson. One day Samson went to Gaza, where he saw a prostitute. He went in to spend the night with her. The people of Gaza were told, "Samson is here." So they surrounded the place and lay in wait for him all night at the city gate. They made no move during the night, saying, "At dawn, we will kill him." But Samson lay there only until the middle of the night. Then he got up and took hold of the doors of the city gate, together with the two posts, and tore them loose, bar and all. He lifted them to his shoulders and carried them to the top of the hill that faces Hebron. Sometime later, he fell in love with a woman in the valley of Sorek, whose name was Delilah. The rulers of the Philistines went to her and said, "See if you can lure him into showing you the secret of his great strength and how we can overpower him so that we may tie him up and subdue him. Each one of us will give you 1,100 shekels of silver." So Delilah said to Samson, "Tell me the secret of your great strength and how you can be tied up and subdued." Samson answered her, "If anyone ties me with 7 fresh bowstrings that have not been dried, I'll become as weak as any other man." Then the rulers of the Philistines brought her 7 fresh bowstrings that had not been dried, and she tied him with them. With men hidden in the room, she called to him, "Samson, the Philistines are upon you." But he snapped the bowstrings as easily as a piece of string snaps when it comes close to a flame. So the secret of his strength was not discovered. Then Delilah said to Samson, "You have made a fool of me. You lied to me. Come now, tell me how you can be tied." He said, "If anyone ties me securely with new ropes that have never been used, I'll become as weak as any other man." So Delilah took new ropes and tied him with them. Then, with men hidden in the room, she called to them, "Samson, the Philistines are upon you." But he snapped the ropes off his arms as if they were threads. Delilah said to Samson, "All this time you have been making a fool of me and lying to me. Tell me how you can be tied." He replied, "If you weave the 7 braids of my head into the fabric on the loom and tighten it with a pin, I'll become as weak as any other man." So while he was sleeping, Delilah took the 7 braids of his head, wove them into the fabric, and tightened it with the pin. Again she called to him, "Samson, the Philistines are upon you." He awoke from his sleep, pulled up the pin and the loom with the fabric. Then she said to him, "How can you say I love you when you won't confide in me? This is the 3rd time you have made a fool of me and haven't told me the secret of your great strength." With such nagging, she prodded him day after day until he was sick to death of it. So he told her everything. "No razor has ever been used on my head, because I have been a Nazirite, dedicated to God from my mother's womb. If my head were shaved, my strength would leave me, and I would become as weak as any other man." When Delilah saw that he had told her everything, she sent word to the rulers of the Philistines, "Come back once more. He has told me everything." So the rulers of the Philistines returned with the silver in their hands. After putting him to sleep on her lap, she called for someone to shave off the 7 braids of his hair and began to subdue him, and his strength left him. Then she called, "Samson, the Philistines are upon you." He awoke from his sleep and thought, "I'll go out as before and shake myself free." But he did not know that the Lord had left him. Then the Philistines seized him, gouged out his eyes, and took him down to Gaza. Binding him with bronze shackles, they set him to grinding corn in the prison. But the hair on his head began to grow again after it had been shaved. Now the rulers of the Philistines assembled to offer a great sacrifice to Dagon their god, and to celebrate, saying, "Our God has delivered Samson, our enemy, into our hands." When the people saw him, they praised their God, saying, "Our God has delivered our enemy into our hands, the one who laid waste our land and multiplied our slain." While they were in high spirits, they shouted, "Bring out Samson to entertain us." So they called Samson out of the prison, and he performed for them. When they stood him among the pillars, Samson said to the servant who held his hand, "Put me where I can feel the pillars that support the temple, that I may lean against them." Now the temple was crowded with men and women. All the rulers of the Philistines were there, and on the roof were about 3,000 men and women watching Samson perform. Then Samson prayed to the Lord. "Sovereign Lord, remember me. Please, God, strengthen me just once more, and let me with one blow get revenge on the Philistines for my 2 eyes." Then Samson reached towards the 2 central pillars on which the temple stood. Bracing himself against them, his right hand on the one and his left hand on the other, Samson said, "Let me die with the Philistines." Then he pushed with all his might, and down came the temple on the rulers and all the people in it. Then he killed many more when he died than when he lived. Then his brothers and his father's whole family went down to get him. They brought him back and buried him between Zorah and Eshtaol in the tomb of Manoah, his father. He had led Israel for 20 years. Well, an amazing story. Lots of violence, lots going on in the story. The story about Samson begins in Judges chapter 13. So do have a look back and read the whole story if you've got time this week. It's not long. Samson's mum is visited by an angel who tells her that she will give birth to a son and that he is to be a Nazirite. A Nazirite was a person who was dedicated to God. For Samson, this was to be for his whole life. He shouldn't drink wine or strong drink. He should never cut his hair. And he had been chosen by God to be a judge of Israel. But Israel was constantly under serious attack from the Philistines at this time, and so there are huge battles which take place in the book. Samson was a warrior leader, and he was tricked by others as many times as he tricked them. He was renowned for his amazing strength, but his weakness was his lust for women. One day he fell in love with Delilah. She wasn't a good choice because she was a Philistine, a member of the enemy at that time. But Samson truly loved her and was bewitched by her appearance and her sexuality. But sadly, Delilah did not love Samson, and she was tempted to betray him when the Philistines offered her a huge amount of silver. Everyone recognized that Samson's strength was God-given, and they felt there must be a secret to the strength. If Delilah could find out the answer to the secret strength, then his enemy could overcome him and take him prisoner. The story takes place over a period of time, but nonetheless it is surprising that Samson gave in to Delilah. 4 times she asks, and 4 times she does get an answer out of Samson. He tells her each time a possible key to his strength, and each time she acts on it. But finally, the last one was true, and Delilah shaves off his hair, and that proved to be the real answer to his amazing strength and close relationship with God. Once his hair was removed, Samson was weak. He could be overcome and taken prisoner. But the enemy forgot that hair will grow back. They grew complacent, using Samson to grind the corn and allowing him to be used as a token of their strength and superiority. The people, called the Philistines, worshipped pagan gods, and they had built temples where people would gather and watch wrestling and other games. They would meet together and socialize. The leaders decided that the people would be entertained by seeing Samson while they celebrated the strength and power of their god Dagon. They brought Samson out. They had caused Samson to be blind, and so Samson asked the guide who was with him to lead him to stand next to a pillar so that he would feel more secure in the mass of people. Samson prayed to God. He prayed that God would hear his prayer to establish their good relationship once again, and his full power returned. He took down the temple and many Philistines along with it. It's not the easiest story. It's full of trickery, fighting, and human love given but not reciprocated. It's also a story of challenge to God, his ways, and of great remorse, and then that welcome back. So what can we discern from the story? Well, for me, the main thing in the story is that our God is faithful. Whatever we're like, whatever we do, our God remains faithful to us. From his birth, our God is faithful to Samson. We see a man who makes his own choices. He goes against the advice of his parents. He is making his own way in the world. But through it all, God is faithful to him. Samson challenges his role as a Nazarene and as a judge. He struggled against his calling, maybe because it asked for a lot of self-discipline and a lot of obedience. His revolt is normal, I suppose. Most people like to do the opposite of what they have been asked, especially as they go through the teenage years. When God called me to full-time ministry, I found lots of ways to walk in the opposite direction. I put up lots of excuses and have often felt a bit like Jonah. Interestingly, it's like Jonah that it's often in storms in my life that get me back on the right path, tossing and turning at night, finding no peace, and then the lifeline from God our Father gets me back on the right path, and then peace descends. I feel sad for Samson. Perhaps he just needed to find peace within himself. It is hard to be brought up as a highly religious person with a role and a destiny, none of which he seemingly chose for himself. And yet his own choices were very poor. Perhaps the story reminds us that pride comes before a fall. The one thing that Samson loved was his amazing strength. He didn't call on an army to defend the Israelites. He took people on by himself and was always the victor. But he became arrogant and trusted himself more than he trusted God. After a huge defeat and humiliation, Samson finally came back to God through his own choice, right at the end of his life. I think that there was still revenge buried deep in the remorse, but certainly by his ability to work with God for good, God won the victory over the pagan gods of the day, which was great for Israel. God remained faithful to Samson throughout his whole life. Our God is faithful. Walk with him, trust him, and learn his ways. I found this passage in 1 Peter and thought it was really helpful. Be self-controlled and alert. Your enemy, the devil, prowls around like a roaring lion, looking for someone to devour. That comes from 1 Peter chapter 5, verse 8. So I thought, well, what have I learnt from Samson? To remain self-controlled and alert. He was so taken in by Delilah. Peter says in 1 Peter chapter 5, your enemy, the devil, prowls around like a roaring lion, looking for someone to devour. So remain self-controlled and alert. Secondly, to keep my eyes on Jesus. And thirdly, to forget pride and personal gain. All of that is so temporary, and we are seeking an eternal goal. Samson is a very challenging story, and we have a lot to learn from it. We thank God for his word to us this morning. Thank you for joining. I can see lots of you, so here's my wave back to your waves. Have a good day and meet some of you at Zoom, and the rest of you have a lovely day. Take care. God bless.